Long before a wall could hold warmth, the human body had to meet winter in the open. Night was not just darkness then. It was cold air on skin, frozen ground beneath the body, smoke moving through branches, and the slow question of whether warmth could last until morning. The danger was not only that winter could hurt, it was that it could keep taking from the body, hour after hour, quietly, until strength, movement, and judgment began to fade. A house now makes cold feel like something outside the window, but for most of human time, there was no clean border between the body and the weather. Winter did not simply surround our ancestors, it waited with them in the dark. How ancient humans survived winter nights before houses. Before winter became a season people watched through glass. It was a place the human body had to enter without asking permission. It was not only cold air, it was the ground beneath the ribs, the wind finding the gaps around the neck, the darkness lowering over a landscape that did not soften itself for sleep. To understand those nights before houses, we have to begin with a simple but uneasy thought. For a very long time, human life did not happen inside a protected room. It happened under open sky, near stone, wood, water, snow, ash, animal tracks, and the changing shape of the land. The body that now expects a mattress, a blanket, a ceiling, and a quiet wall behind the head once belonged to a world where none of those things could be assumed. In that older world, winter was not a background condition. It was an active pressure on every choice, every movement, every hour of rest. A cold night did not need to arrive with violence to become dangerous. It only needed to continue. It only needed to pull heat away a little at a time, making fingers stiff, making breathing shallow, making the mind slower, making the distance between being awake and being unable to respond feel thinner than it feels to us now. This is why the question is not simply how ancient humans stayed warm. Warmth was part of it. But the deeper question is how a creature with a warm-blooded body, bare skin compared with many animals, and a need for sleep could remain alive when the sun disappeared and the earth itself became cold. The beginning of human survival was not the comfort of a finished dwelling. It was the repeated effort to reduce exposure, to read the wind, to choose a place, to remain close enough to others, and to pass through the night without losing too much of what the body needed for morning. Long before the first permanent houses, there were still human decisions. There were still memories carried from one winter to the next. There were still older people who knew which places became dangerous after sunset, which ground held dampness, which slopes caught the wind, and which parts of a landscape felt slightly less hostile when darkness settled. The first protection was not always a structure. Often it was attention. It was the ability to notice that the same cold did not feel the same everywhere. Near open water, the air might bite differently. On exposed ground, the wind might strip warmth faster. Under rock, among trees, behind a rise in the land, or near a place already used before, the body might lose heat more slowly. These differences were small, but small differences could matter when the night was long. Early humans did not need to defeat winter in order to survive it. They needed to reduce its reach, hour by hour, enough for the body to continue. That is what makes this subject so different from the way winter is often imagined today. In the present, we think of cold as something to escape. We step indoors, close a door, and the problem seems to remain outside. But before houses, there was no single boundary that solved the night. The boundary had to be made again and again, from body position, from landscape, from fire when it was available, from materials that could slow heat loss, from the closeness of others, and from knowledge learned through many fragile attempts. The origins of human life were shaped not only by hunting, tools, and movement across continents, but also by the quieter problem of where a tired body could safely stop. Every winter night asked that question again. Where can a human body rest without giving too much of itself back to the cold? Before houses, survival was not a fixed shelter waiting in one place. It was a careful relationship with the world just outside the skin, a relationship learned slowly, carried by groups, and tested most clearly when the light was gone. A winter night before houses was dangerous because it removed the easy exits that make cold feel manageable today. In modern life, cold usually arrives with an answer nearby. A coat hangs by the door, a room waits behind a wall, a light can be turned on, A bed is raised from the floor. Even when the air outside is sharp, the body knows there is a warmer place close enough to reach. That knowledge changes the way cold feels. It becomes temporary, bordered, almost negotiable. But for ancient humans living before built houses became ordinary, the cold of night could not always be placed outside the self. It pressed directly against the body's limits, and its danger came from how slowly it worked. A sudden threat can be seen, heard, or escaped. Cold is different. It does not need to move quickly. It simply remains. It touches the skin, then the hands, then the feet, then the breath. It makes the body spend energy only to stay near its own normal warmth. It asks for fuel from inside. If the night is long enough, the body begins to pay for stillness. This is the quiet danger of winter. It can turn rest into labor. Sleep, which should restore life, becomes difficult when the body must keep defending its heat. In the deep beginning of human life, long before permanent walls, the problem was not only where to sleep, but how to sleep without letting the night take too much. This matters because humans are not shaped like animals that can simply lie down in snow and trust fur, fat, or a thick winter coat to do most of the work. Human beings have warm blood, active brains, exposed faces, sensitive fingers, and bodies that lose heat in many small ways. Our ancestors were adaptable, but adaptability did not mean invincibility. It meant that survival depended on behavior, memory, timing, and the careful use of whatever the environment offered. The body could shiver, curl inward, reduce movement, and protect its center, but these were responses, not complete solutions. A winter night could outlast them. The danger grew not because every night was extreme, and not because every ancient group faced the same climate, but because night changed the rules of the landscape. During the day, a person could walk, search, gather, repair, watch, choose, and move away from a bad place. The body could create heat through motion, the eyes could read distance. The group could see the shape of weather coming across open ground. But after darkness settled, movement became harder, mistakes became more costly, and the same cold seemed to widen. The ground that was merely uncomfortable in daylight could become a slow drain beneath the body. Wind that felt sharp while walking could become dangerous when a tired person stopped. Dampness that seemed minor before sunset could steal warmth hour after hour. In that older world, winter night was not one problem. It was many small problems becoming one long pressure. The body needed rest, but rest meant less movement. Less movement meant less heat from activity. Less heat meant more strain. More strain meant poorer judgment. Poorer judgment could make it harder to protect the body before the cold deepened. This is why ancient winter nights cannot be understood only as scenes of snow or frozen air. They were tests of timing. They were tests of where a group stopped. How tired people were when darkness came. Whether children could remain warm, whether older members had the strength to endure, and whether the place chosen before sunset still felt safe after midnight. The origins of human survival were shaped by these repeated evenings, when the day's decisions became the night's conditions. A poor choice of ground, a wet place, an exposed ridge, a failure to notice wind, or a body already weakened by hunger could become more serious as the hours passed. And because winter returned year after year, the danger was not only one night, it was the accumulation of nights across a lifetime, across childhood, across pregnancy, across injury, across old age, across the fragile chain by which one generation became another. Before houses, winter did not have to destroy a whole group to shape human life. It only had to make survival depend on attention. It only had to teach that warmth was not a feeling to be enjoyed, but a condition to be guarded. It only had to turn the simple act of lying down into a question that reached back to the beginning of human experience. How can a body made for life remain alive when the world around it keeps pulling warmth away? Before houses, the space between a human body and winter had to be invented again each evening. It was not invented once, in a clean moment, by someone deciding to build the first safe room. It began much earlier than that, in smaller decisions that left fewer traces. A group stopping before darkness. A person noticing that the wind changed near a line of trees. A child being placed closer to warmth than an adult. a tired body turning away from open air. A familiar place being remembered because the last night there had been survived. These were not houses, but they were already the beginning of a boundary. And that boundary is the hidden center of the question. Ancient humans did not survive winter nights by living as if the cold did not matter. They survived by narrowing the contact between the body and the cold world around it. In the beginning of human life, before fixed shelters became ordinary, there was no permanent wall to separate inside from outside. There were only degrees of exposure, more wind or less wind, wet ground or dry ground, open sky or some cover above, alone or near others, still air or moving air. A place where heat vanished quickly, or a place where it faded more slowly. Survival could depend on feeling those differences before they became severe. This is difficult for us to imagine because modern houses make protection seem like a single thing. There is indoors and there is outdoors. There is shelter and there is weather. But for ancient humans, the world was not divided so neatly. A cave mouth might protect from rain but still hold cold air. A hollow in the land might block wind but gather dampness. A wooded area might soften exposure but hide other risks. A fire might create a warmer center while the edges remained cold. A covering might help one side of the body while the ground still drew heat from below. Nothing made the winter night disappear. Each choice only reduced one part of it. That is why the earliest form of shelter may be understood less as a finished object and more as a pattern of attention. The human body, with its need for warmth, sleep, food, and social closeness, had to learn the landscape as a partner and an opponent at the same time. A place was not simply beautiful, empty, or dangerous. It had a direction of wind. It had a kind of soil. It had branches that might break or bend. It had stone that might hold a little dryness. It had shadows, slopes, animal paths, and signs from earlier use. Over many generations, such knowledge would not have felt like abstract knowledge. It would have lived in habits, where people paused, where they returned, where they avoided stopping late, where elders guided younger bodies without needing to explain every reason. The deep history of winter survival is therefore not only the history of tools or fire or coverings, it is also the history of learning how to stop moving without becoming helpless. For a moving human, cold can be resisted for a while through activity. Walking, carrying, searching, working, and staying alert all create heat and choice. But night asks the body to become still. It asks the group to slow down. It asks children to sleep, the injured to rest, and the exhausted to trust the place around them. Before houses, that trust could never be complete. The body remained partly open to the weather. Even when some protection existed, winter still pressed through gaps, through dampness, through the ground, through the long hours after midnight when energy was lower and the next day had not yet begun. In this way, the question of ancient winter nights becomes a larger question about the beginning of human beings. How did a species not covered in thick fur, not naturally armored against frost, and not able to sleep safely anywhere, create enough distance from the world to remain alive? The answer cannot be only one invention, because the danger was not only one danger. It was air, ground, darkness, fatigue, hunger, children, memory, and time together. Before there were houses, there were attempts to make a small inside without walls, not an inside like a modern room, but a fragile inside, made from closeness, placement, habit, and the careful reading of cold. The first boundary between human life and winter may have been uneven, temporary, and almost invisible. Yet it mattered because it allowed the body to do something essential, lose less warmth than it could afford to lose before morning came. The human body is warm because it is always working, even in sleep, even in stillness. Even when the mind seems to drift away from the world, the body is spending energy to remain within a narrow range of heat. This is easy to forget inside a room. A modern sleeper can lie still for many hours because walls, bedding, floors, and heating systems quietly share part of the burden. The body is not alone with the night. But before houses became ordinary, the body had far less help from the built world. It had to defend its warmth in direct contact with air, ground, dampness, and wind. To understand how ancient humans survived winter nights, we first have to see where the human body is weak before the cold. not weak in the sense of helpless. Human beings are among the most adaptable animals on Earth, but our strength has never been the simple strength of fur, hide, claws, or a thick layer of natural insulation. Our strength came from something less visible: behavior, memory, cooperation, tool use, and the ability to change the conditions around the body. The body itself had limits that winter could find very quickly. Compared with many mammals living in cold places, humans have relatively exposed skin. We do not carry a natural winter coat that thickens enough to make sleeping outdoors easy. Our faces remain open. Our hands must stay useful. Our feet carry us, but they are far from the warm center of the body. The ears, nose, fingers and toes are small places where cold can be felt early and sharply. The body can reduce blood flow to outer areas to protect the core, but that protection comes with a cost. The hands become clumsy. The feet lose comfort. Small movements become harder. A person can still think, but the body begins to ask more urgently for protection. In the deep beginning of human life, this mattered every night the temperature dropped, because survival did not depend only on being alive at sunset. It depended on keeping enough function until dawn. The warm center of the body had to be protected. The brain, heart, lungs, and inner organs needed steady heat. If warmth moved away too quickly, the body responded by tightening, shivering, curling inward, and burning more energy. Shivering is a useful response, but it is not peaceful. It is work. It means the body is making heat through small, repeated muscle contractions. For an ancient person already tired from walking, carrying, gathering, hunting, or caring for others, that extra work could matter. Winter did not arrive at an empty body. It arrived after a day of effort. It met people who may not have eaten enough, who may have been wet, who may have been injured, who may have been responsible for children, who may have had to remain alert even while exhausted. Cold made every other pressure heavier. Hunger was harder in the cold because heat costs energy. Damp clothing or coverings were more dangerous because water carries heat away faster than dry air. Wind was more than discomfort because moving air strips away the warmer layer that gathers near the skin. The ground was more than a surface because direct contact could draw warmth from the body through the night. Ancient humans did not need a scientific word for any of this to understand it. They only needed memory. They needed to remember that some kinds of cold were survivable, while others slowly broke the body's ability to rest. This is why the human body's weakness before winter became the beginning of culture, not just a biological problem. A wolf carries much of its shelter on its body. A bear enters winter with a different body plan, different fat reserves, different seasonal strategies. Humans carried much of their shelter outside the body, in knowledge and shared practice. That does not mean every ancient group lived the same way, or that one simple method explains them all. It means that the exposed human body created a need for solutions beyond the skin. The origin of winter survival was not a single heroic act. It was the slow recognition that the body could not meet cold as a bare animal alone. It needed a chosen place. It needed protection from wind. It needed dry ground when possible. It needed coverings, warmth, closeness, and the learned judgment of people who had seen many nights before. In this sense, the ancient human body was both fragile and powerful. Fragile, because winter could reach it through skin, breath, hands, feet, and sleep. Powerful, because it could answer that fragility with attention. The body could feel cold early. The mind could remember where cold had been worse. The group could adjust before darkness, and slowly, over generations, the weakness of the body became one of the forces that pushed humans towards shelter, cooperation, and a more careful relationship with the night. Cold does not only touch the skin. If it lasts long enough, it begins to change the way the body behaves. At first, a person may only feel discomfort, tight shoulders, stiff fingers, a sharper awareness of breath, a wish to turn away from the wind. But a winter night before houses could continue past the first layer of discomfort. It could move into the deeper systems that kept a human being alert, coordinated, and able to make good choices. This is where the danger became quiet and serious. The body could fight cold by shivering, by narrowing blood flow near the surface, by pulling the limbs closer to the center, by urging the person to seek cover, movement, warmth, or closeness. These responses were useful. They were part of why humans could live in many different climates, yet they also showed that cold was demanding payment. Shivering used energy. Tension used energy. Staying awake because the body could not settle used energy. Even fear of the cold, the careful listening to wind and darkness, used attention that a tired mind might not have. For ancient humans, this mattered because winter nights did not usually begin with a rested, well-fed body lying safely indoors. They began after the work of a day. A group might have walked across uneven ground, carried tools or children, searched for food, gathered fuel, prepared a place to stop, watched the weather, and managed the needs of the young and the weak. When darkness came, the body was not starting from fullness. It was already living inside limits. Cold made those limits narrower. The first danger was energy. A warm-blooded body must keep producing heat, and in cold conditions this can become costly. If food had been scarce, if the day had been long, or if a person was already thin, sick, injured, or very young, the extra demand of staying warm could become more difficult. This does not mean every winter night was a crisis. Human groups learned, adjusted, and survived across many environments, but the body's basic rule remained the same. Heat is not free. It must come from the energy stored and made available inside the body. In deep human history, before houses gave regular protection, winter could force the body to spend tomorrow's strength simply to reach morning. The second danger was movement. Cold hands are not only painful, they become less useful. Fingers that lose warmth become slower, less precise, less able to grip, tie, hold, repair, or adjust coverings. Feet that grow cold make movement less sure. A person who needs to change position, gather more material, tend warmth, comfort a child, or move away from a bad place may find that the body does not answer as smoothly as it did earlier. This is one of the subtle ways winter can become dangerous without drama. It reduces the variabilities needed to respond to it. A cold body is not just a body feeling cold. It may become a body less able to solve the problem of cold. The third danger was judgment. When the body is under stress, tired, hungry, and cold, the mind may become narrower. Decisions that would be clear in daylight may feel heavy at night. A person may wait too long before moving. A group may underestimate dampness, wind, or the loss of heat through the ground. Someone may feel sleepy when wakefulness is still needed. These are not failures of intelligence. They are signs that the human brain, like the rest of the body, depends on warmth, energy, and rest. In the beginning of human life, survival was never only muscle against weather. It was attention against slow decline. It was the ability to notice danger before cold made noticing harder. This may be one reason experience mattered so deeply. Older people who had lived through many winters could carry a kind of memory that was not written down, but held in the body and in habit. They might know that a place that seems acceptable at sunset can become cruel after midnight. They might know that dampness is more dangerous than it appears. They might know that the body should not be allowed to become deeply chilled before protection is improved. Such knowledge would have been practical, quiet, and repeated. It would have shaped where people stopped, how they arranged themselves, how they guarded warmth, and how they treated the signs of fatigue. Ancient humans survived not because cold was harmless to them, but because they learned that cold attacks in stages. First, comfort fades, then movement becomes harder, then judgment becomes poorer. Then sleep itself becomes uncertain. Before houses, every winter night carried this slow sequence as a possibility, and human life had to organize itself around preventing that sequence from going too far. A human body without thick fur could not treat winter as a simple background. It had to answer winter with behavior. This is one of the quiet turning points in human origins. The body alone was not enough, so life had to extend beyond the body. Skin could feel the cold, muscles could shiver, hands could pull limbs inward, but none of these responses made a winter night safe by themselves. The human answer had to become larger than biology. It had to include memory, shared habits, materials, chosen places, and the ability to notice danger before the body was too tired to respond. This does not mean ancient humans were weak in a simple way. It means their strength was never only carried in flesh. Many animals meet cold with bodies already shaped for it. Dense fur traps air. Seasonal fat stores energy. Some species change their behavior dramatically with the season. Humans did not follow one narrow path like that. They became a species that survived by making the world around the body slightly more livable. Before houses, that process was still unfinished, temporary, and repeated every evening. A group could not simply depend on instinct and sleep anywhere. It had to learn which exposures were costly, which places held dampness, which winds grew worse after sunset, and which small choices helped the body lose heat more slowly. In this sense, the cold did not only threaten early humans, it trained attention. It made the difference between a careless stop and a careful stop matter. It made the memory of previous nights valuable. It made older experience part of survival. The body's lack of natural insulation pushed people toward knowledge that could be carried socially, from one person to another, from one season to the next. A child did not have to discover every danger alone if others had already learned where not to sleep, when to move closer, how to keep dry, and why stillness could become dangerous when the air kept falling colder. This is where human winter survival becomes different from a story about endurance. Endurance alone would not have been enough. A body can endure discomfort for a while, but winter nights are not only uncomfortable, they are long. They test the same weakness again and again. The exposed face, the hands, the feet, the need for sleep, the cost of shivering, the drain of hunger, and the slowing of judgment all create a problem that no single reflex can solve. Human beings needed an outer layer made of behavior, not a modern outer layer, not yet a permanent room, but a living pattern around the body, where people gathered how close they remained, how they used the land, how they watched the sky, how they protected the young, and how they recognized that warmth could be lost silently. The beginning of human protection was therefore not only physical, it was cultural. It was the moment cold became something people could prepare for, talk about, remember, and organize around. Even without written language, the knowledge of winter could live in repeated action. A certain place was avoided. A certain direction of wind was noticed. A certain kind of ground was distrusted. A body already cold was treated as urgent before it became helpless. These habits would not look dramatic from the outside, but they formed a quiet shield around human life. Before houses, humans survived winter nights because their vulnerable bodies forced them to become more than isolated bodies. The cold reached the skin, but the answer came from the group, from memory, from attention, and from the slow growth of practices that allowed a warm creature to remain alive in a world that did not stay warm for it. Daylight gave ancient humans something winter night took away: movement. In the day, a cold body could walk, carry, gather, search, climb, repair, follow tracks, watch clouds, and change its position before danger deepened. Movement made heat. Light made choice easier. The eyes could read the land, and the group could see whether a place was too exposed, too wet, too far from fuel, or too open to wind. Cold in daylight was still serious, but it was mixed with action. The body could answer it by doing. A person could keep blood moving through the limbs, shift direction, adjust coverings, seek lower ground or higher ground, and make decisions while the world was still visible. Night changed that balance. When darkness settled over a winter landscape before houses, the body was no longer free in the same way. Moving too much could waste energy. Moving too far could mean losing the place already chosen. Moving without light could bring injury, confusion, or separation from others. Yet remaining still carried its own danger, because stillness reduced the heat created by work. This is why winter nights were not simply colder versions of winter days. They were a different kind of test. They asked the human body to survive while doing less, seeing less, and trusting more. For a species whose early survival depended so much on attention and movement, the night placed a quiet limit on both. The beginning of human life was shaped by this rhythm: the active day, the exposed evening, and the long hours when the body had to stop without becoming defenseless. Before permanent houses, stopping was never a simple act. A group did not merely decide to sleep. It had to enter a slower state while the environment remained active. Wind could change. Dampness could rise from the ground. Temperature could fall after sunset. Clouds could clear, letting heat escape more quickly into the open sky. A place that felt tolerable in late afternoon might feel much harsher when the body was tired and the dark had deepened. This was the hidden danger of night. It did not need new enemies. It changed the meaning of ordinary things. A stone surface became colder. Grass became damp. Open ground became exposed. Distance became harder to judge. A small mistake made before sleep could grow larger simply because there were many hours left before morning. In modern life, sleep usually means surrendering control inside a protected space. Before houses, sleep could not be such a complete surrender. The body needed rest, but the group still needed some relationship with the world outside the skin. Someone might wake. Someone might listen. Someone might tend warmth. Someone might notice that a child had shifted away from protection, or that the wind had found a gap. These quiet interruptions were not separate from survival. They were part of what allowed rest to happen at all. Ancient humans had to balance two needs that pulled against each other: the need to sleep and the need not to disappear too deeply into sleep. This balance reaches back to the starting point of human history, when safety was not built into a room but produced through place, closeness, memory, and repeated adjustment. The winter day could be met with work. The winter night had to be met with arrangement. Where bodies lay, how close they were, what lay beneath them, what shielded them from wind, and how much warmth remained nearby, all became more important after darkness. The danger of night was therefore not only physical, it was temporal. It came from duration. A person could endure a sharp, cold wind for a short time and still recover. A body could touch cold ground briefly and move away. But a whole night stretched the same pressure across many hours. Human survival depended on making those hours less costly. Before houses, the night did not pause for human weakness. It kept moving slowly over skin, breath, ground, and thought, while the body waited for light to return. Darkness made winter larger. In daylight, a cold landscape still had edges, shapes, paths, and distances the eyes could measure. A person could see where the trees thickened, where the ground dipped, where stone might block wind, where smoke drifted, where water made the air feel damp, and where footprints showed the movement of animals or people. But after sunset, much of that information faded. The world did not disappear, yet it became harder to read. A slope could no longer be judged as clearly. A wet patch of ground might not be noticed until the body had already settled near it. A change in wind might be heard before it was understood. In winter, this loss of sight mattered because cold was not the only danger. Cold worked together with darkness, wind, ground, and time. Each one made the others more serious. A cold night in a sheltered place was different from a cold night on open ground. A dry cold was different from a damp cold. Still air was different from moving air. Frozen ground beneath the body was different from dry leaves, grass, or soil that held less chill. Ancient humans did not need modern instruments to know these differences. Their bodies taught them slowly, through discomfort, memory, and survival. But the lesson became harder after dark, when the signs of the land were less visible and the body was already tired. This is why winter nights before houses cannot be imagined, only as people sitting in the cold. The whole environment was involved. The sky mattered, because an open sky could allow warmth to escape more easily from the ground and from exposed bodies. Wind mattered, because it could remove the thin layer of warmer air that gathered near skin or around a resting group. The ground mattered, because a person lying down had a larger surface pressed towards something that might steadily pull heat away. Dampness mattered, because moisture could make cold feel deeper and more difficult to resist. Time mattered most of all, because none of these forces needed to be extreme if they continued long enough. The beginning of human survival was shaped by this long contact with place. Before houses, a night was not simply a period between sunset and sunrise. It was a stretch of exposure that had to be managed. A group might choose a place before dark, but the place continued to change while they rested. Air cooled. Fire, if present, weakened and less cared for. People shifted in sleep. Children moved. Tired adults became less alert. The coldest hours often came later, when the body had already spent energy and the mind wanted to sink more deeply into rest. In such conditions, danger did not always announce itself. It accumulated. A person might begin the night only uncomfortable and wake later, with stiff hands, numb feet, and a mind slower to act. A group might realize too late that the wind had changed direction, or that the ground beneath them was colder than expected. The darkness made each correction more difficult. To move was to spend energy. To stay was to keep losing heat. To wake others was to disturb rest. But to ignore a worsening condition could be worse. These were not dramatic choices, yet they belonged to the ancient human struggle with winter. In the deep past, the body's need for sleep met an environment that did not stop moving. The wind kept moving, the cold kept deepening, the ground kept drawing heat, the dark kept hiding details. Every winter night asked the same quiet question in a slightly different form. Had the group chosen well enough before the light disappeared? This question reaches toward the earliest human relationship with shelter. A house, much later, would make night seem more stable. It would hold one space apart from another. But before houses, stability had to be borrowed from the land, from memory, from closeness, and from careful attention before the body became too tired. Winter night was dangerous because it narrowed the world at the very moment when good choices mattered most. It reduced sight, slowed movement, lengthened discomfort, and made the body wait for morning inside a landscape it could no longer fully see. A winter night was not a single event in ancient human life. It returned again and again, across seasons, across childhoods, across the long movement of groups through colder and warmer lands. One difficult night could be survived by luck, by strength, or by a favorable place. But a whole life could not depend on luck alone. This is why the night mattered so deeply. It was repeated. It tested the body not once, but many times, and each return made memory more important. Before houses, humans did not face winter as isolated moments of discomfort. They faced a pattern. Evening after evening, the light fell. The ground cooled. The wind became harder to judge. Children grew tired. Adults carried the weight of the day. The group had to stop somewhere, and that place had to be good enough not only for the strongest person, but for the people whose bodies had less room for error. The beginning of human survival was shaped by this repetition. A dangerous night did not need to become a story of disaster in order to teach something. It could leave a smaller lesson. Avoid that exposed ridge. Do not sleep too close to damp ground. Do not wait until the body is already deeply cold. Do not assume that a place safe in daylight will remain kind after midnight. These lessons could pass quietly through behavior. A young person might learn by following where older people stopped. A child might grow up knowing, without formal explanation, that certain winds were bad, certain hollows were colder, certain materials mattered, and certain distances from others were unwise. In this way, winter night became a teacher that no one had chosen. It taught through consequence. It shaped habits because the body remembered what pain and danger felt like. Over many generations, such habits could become part of the invisible structure of human life. Not a building yet, not a permanent home, but a repeated way of arranging people against the dark. This is the larger meaning of winter nights before houses. They were not only obstacles to be endured, they were forces that pressed human beings toward planning. A warm body that needs sleep cannot survive forever by reacting at the last moment. It must prepare before weakness begins. It must choose before darkness removes detail. It must gather before cold stiffens the hands. It must keep the young close before the night deepens. It must use the memory of yesterday's danger to reduce tomorrow's risk. That kind of preparation is one of the roots of human culture. It is not dramatic, but it is profound. A creature that prepares is already living partly in time. It is using what happened before to protect what has not happened yet. Winter made this relationship with time sharper. The cold of one night could influence where people stopped the next night. The survival of one child could depend on knowledge carried by someone much older. A group's future could depend on whether the experience of past winters remained alive in practice. This is why winter nights touched more than the body. They touched the structure of generations. If only the strongest adults could survive, the group would not continue for long. Children had to pass through the cold. Mothers had to pass through it. Injured people, tired people, older people with knowledge, all had to be considered in some way. The night was therefore a test of the group, not just the individual. Before houses, the human answer to winter was not yet a stable wall, but it was already a social shape. People had to organize rest around vulnerability. They had to make the dangerous hours less dangerous for bodies that could not simply endure more. That may be one reason the idea of shelter belongs so deeply to human history. Shelter was never only a thing. It was a relationship between bodies, weather, memory, and care. Long before a house could stand in one place, the need for something like a house already existed inside the way humans gathered at night. Each winter evening asked for a small version of safety, made from what was available and remembered from what had happened before. The true pressure of winter was not only that it was cold, it was that it returned, and every return asked whether human beings had learned enough from the last time the dark came down. Before a house existed as a fixed place, shelter was a smaller and more fragile idea. It was not yet four walls, a roof, a door, and a floor. It was any reduced contact between a warm body and a cold world. This is important because the first human boundary against winter did not have to look like a building. It could be a line of trees that slowed the wind. It could be a rock face that blocked one direction of cold air. It could be a hollow where bodies were less exposed, or a dry patch of ground that did not steal heat as quickly. It could be the way people placed themselves near one another, the way they turned their backs toward weather, or the way they noticed that one side of a landscape felt less punishing than another. Before houses, survival began with this simple principle. The body did not need perfect protection to live through the night. It needed enough protection, in enough ways, for enough hours. That small difference matters. A modern person often imagines shelter as something complete. Either one is outside or one is inside. Either one is exposed or one is safe. But ancient winter survival existed between those two ideas. There were many degrees of being exposed. A body under open sky was not the same as a body partly protected by stone. A body lying on wet ground was not the same as a body separated from dampness by dry material. A person alone in moving air was not the same as a person resting close to others in a place where the wind had less power. None of these conditions made winter harmless. They only changed how quickly cold could reach the body. In deep human history, that was often the real measure of safety. Not whether cold disappeared, but whether it arrived slowly enough for life to continue until morning. This is where the idea of a temporary boundary becomes central. Human beings could not grow a winter coat overnight. They could not change the shape of their skin, hands, feet, or sleeping needs every season, but they could change the space around them. They could choose, arrange, gather, remember, and return. The boundary against winter was made from decisions. It was made before darkness, when the group still had enough light to read the land. It was made by noticing wind, dryness, cover, distance, and the needs of the weakest bodies. A child, an injured adult, or an older person could not be treated as if they had the same margin of safety as a strong moving hunter. The place of rest had to answer the body as it really was, not as one wished it to be. This links the problem of winter nights directly to the origin of human life. Our ancestors survived not because the world became gentle, but because they learned to make small zones of reduced danger. A chosen sleeping place was already a kind of thought. It said, "Here, the wind is less direct. Here, the ground may be drier. Here, the group can remain close. Here, warmth may last a little longer." These were not abstract ideas. They were lived through skin, breath, fatigue, and memory. Every night that was survived could quietly teach the next night. Every poor place could become a warning. Every slightly better place could become part of a group's knowledge. Before houses, the boundary between human life and winter was not made once. It was remade again and again with each stop, each season, each generation. It was fragile, but it was not meaningless. It was the beginning of shelter as a human habit, long before shelter became a human structure. For ancient humans, the place chosen for sleep could be as important as food in a cold season, because sleep was the moment when the body stopped defending itself through movement. During the day, people could walk, search, carry, gather, and adjust. At night, the body needed to become still, and stillness made the surrounding space more powerful. A poor place did not simply feel uncomfortable. It could make every hour more expensive for the body. Too much wind, too much dampness, too much contact with cold ground, or too much distance from others could turn rest into a slow loss of heat. This is why the question of where to stop was not a small detail in the deep past. Before houses, a sleeping place was not just a location. It was a temporary answer to winter. A group that stopped in the wrong place might spend the whole night paying for that choice. A group that stopped in a slightly better place might not feel safe in the modern sense, but the body might lose warmth more slowly, wake less often, and have more strength left for morning. In this older world, survival often depended on such small differences. Food kept the body alive over days and seasons, but the place of sleep protected the body during the hours when it could not keep working. The beginning of human life was shaped by that balance, the need to move through the world and the need to stop without being taken by it. A resting place had to answer many questions at once. Was the ground dry enough? Was it protected from the strongest wind? Was there some cover above or behind? Was the place too close to water where damp cold might settle? Was it too exposed to open sky? Could the group remain close together? Could children be kept warm enough? Could tired adults rest without being too far from what helped them endure the night? None of these questions needed to be spoken in the way we speak them now. They could live as habit, as feeling, as repeated memory. People might return to a place because it had worked before. They might avoid another because the body remembered a bad night there. The landscape was not empty space. It was a map of past exposure. This is why winter survival before houses was never only about strength. A strong body in a poor place could suffer more than a weaker body in a better one. The land itself could either increase the burden or reduce it. A small rise might take more wind. A hollow might feel sheltered but hold damp air. A rock wall might block one side of the weather. A cluster of trees might slow moving air. Dry material beneath the body might matter more than a person would expect. The body learned through consequences that the cold came from more than the air. It came from below, from the side, from moisture, from time, from the inability to move freely once darkness had fallen. To choose a sleeping place was therefore to choose the shape of the night. Before houses, this choice became one of the quiet skills that allowed human groups to continue. It connected biology to memory. It connected the needs of children to the experience of elders. It connected the day's movement to the night's survival. And it showed something central about human origins. Our ancestors did not merely endure the world as they found it. They searched for small margins inside it. They looked for places where the world was still harsh, but slightly less harsh. They used attention to turn part of the landscape into a temporary shelter. A place to sleep was not yet a house, but it was already part of the long path toward one. It was the moment when a tired body asked the land for a little mercy, and the group had to know where that mercy was most likely to be found. The movement from a personal reaction to a shared skill may be one of the quietest changes in human history. A single body can feel cold and try to answer it. It can curl inward, turn away from wind, pull arms close, rise and move, or seek a warmer surface. But a single body only knows what it feels in that moment. A group can remember more. A group can compare one night with another. It can notice that one place was worse than expected, that one kind of ground stayed damp, that one direction of wind returned after sunset, that children grew colder, faster, or that the strongest adults could not be used as the measure for everyone. Before houses, this movement from reaction to shared habit mattered deeply. Winter could not be solved by instinct alone, because the danger was too slow, too varied, and too connected to place. A sudden chill might make the body respond, but a long night required something wider than reflex. It required learned behavior. It required people to prepare before the cold reached its worst. This is where the early human relationship with winter became cultural. Culture does not have to begin with monuments, writing, or cities. It can begin with repeated ways of staying alive. It can begin with where people stop, who sleeps closest to warmth, which materials are gathered before dark, which places are avoided, and how the group understands the needs of bodies that cannot speak for themselves. In the deep past, such knowledge may not have been explained as a theory. It may have lived in action. Someone knew where to go. Someone knew not to wait too long. Someone knew that a cold child needed attention before the child became silent. Someone knew that dampness was not a small problem. These small acts formed a memory larger than one person. The body's weakness before winter helped create a social intelligence around cold. The group became an outer sense organ, noticing what one tired individual might miss. The origin of shelter, in this way, was not only a matter of material, it was also a matter of coordination. A branch, a hide, a rock face, a fire, or a dry surface could help only if people knew how and when to use it. A good place could be wasted by poor timing. A useful material could fail if it became wet. Warmth could fade if no one watched it. A child could drift away from protection during sleep. The night kept asking for small corrections, and those corrections were easier when knowledge was shared. This is why the story of ancient winter survival cannot be reduced to the strongest person enduring the cold. Human survival has always depended on making individual limits less final. The cold found the skin of each body, but the answer often came from relationships among bodies. One person's experience could protect another person's future. One winter's mistake could change the next winter's habit. One elder's memory could help a child who had never known such cold before. Over generations, repeated survival became a kind of quiet inheritance. Not an inheritance of objects only, because many early materials would decay and leave little trace, but an inheritance of placement, timing, caution, and care. This helps explain why winter nights before houses are so important to the deeper question of being human. They reveal that humans did not simply adapt by changing the body. They adapted by changing the conditions around the body and by teaching one another how to do that. The first true distance between people and winter may not have been a wall. It may have been a remembered warning, a shared arrangement, a habit of stopping before darkness, a way of keeping vulnerable bodies nearer to safety. Such things are difficult to see in the archaeological record, but they belong to the logic of survival. Before houses, ancient humans had to turn the experience of cold into knowledge. They had to turn knowledge into routine. They had to turn routine into a fragile boundary that could be rebuilt wherever the night found them. The first shelter ancient humans knew was not necessarily something they built. It was often something the land already offered. Before walls, roofs, and doors became dependable human tools, the shape of the earth itself could reduce the reach of winter. A rock face could stop wind from one direction. A cluster of trees could slow moving air. A slope could catch or avoid weather depending on where people rested. A hollow might hide a group from the sharpest gusts, while a dry rise might keep bodies away from damp ground. These were not houses, but they mattered because the body did not need the entire world to become warm. It needed a small change in exposure. It needed the cold to arrive more slowly. In a winter night before houses, that small difference could decide how much strength remained by morning. This is why the landscape was never just scenery in early human life. It was part of survival. A modern person might see a valley, a cave mouth, a line of trees, or a broken cliff as a background. An ancient group moving through cold conditions would have experienced such places more physically. The question was not only what could be seen, but what the body would feel there after sunset. Would the wind pass through? Would dampness settle? Would the ground stay cold and wet? Would the place become colder when the sky cleared? Would the group have enough room to remain close, to rest, and to respond if the night worsened? Before permanent houses, the land itself held partial answers. None of them were perfect. A cave could be damp. A forest could be dark and uneven. A hollow could gather cold air. An exposed ridge could stay dry but lose warmth quickly to wind. The skill was not in finding a magical, safe place. It was in reading trade-offs. The beginning of human shelter was the ability to notice that every place protected against something while exposing the body to something else. This kind of knowledge would have been practical and slow. It came from walking through seasons, from returning to places, from remembering which stops had left people colder, which places had kept children quieter through the night, which ground had seemed dry but turned harsh after hours of stillness. Such knowledge belonged to the body before it belonged to words. The skin remembered wind. The feet remembered damp ground. The hands remembered the difficulty of working in cold after a poor stop. In the deep past, Before most materials could leave durable traces, these decisions may have disappeared from the archaeological record, but they would not have disappeared from life. The land was a kind of tool, used without being detached from the earth. A rock overhang did not have to be made by human hands to become part of human survival. A stand of trees did not have to be built to become part of a night's protection. What mattered was the relationship between body and place. This relationship helps answer the larger question of how ancient humans survived winter nights before houses. They did not begin with full separation from nature. They began by finding softer edges within nature. They looked for places where winter was still present, but less direct, less wind on the skin, less moisture under the body, less open sky above, less distance between one person and another. Over many generations, these repeated choices likely shaped routes, camps, memories, and social habits. A group that knew the land could arrive at evening with more than fatigue. It could arrive with expectation. It could know that certain places deserved attention before darkness, while others should be passed by even if the body wanted to stop. This was shelter before architecture. Not a built room, but an informed pause in the right part of the world. The first protection against winter may have been a human mind learning to see the landscape not as open space, but as a map of possible nights. Caves, rock shelters, forests, slopes, and dry patches of earth were not equal in the ancient winter night. Each one changed the body's contact with cold in a different way. A cave could offer a roof of stone where rain or snow did not fall directly on the skin, but it could also hold dampness, darkness, and cold air. A rock overhang could block weather from above while leaving one side open to wind. A forest could soften the force of moving air, but the ground beneath trees might be uneven, wet, or covered with old leaves that held moisture. A slope facing away from the strongest wind could feel calmer, while another slope nearby could become unbearable after sunset. These differences were not small to a body trying to sleep. Before houses, the world was full of partial shelters, and the skill was in knowing what kind of partial shelter was needed that night. It would be misleading to imagine all ancient humans as cave dwellers. Some groups used caves or rock shelters when they were available, and such places preserve traces better than open landscapes, which is one reason they appear so often in archaeology. But most human life across deep time did not happen inside perfect caves. People moved through varied environments: open grasslands, wooded valleys, river edges, rocky hills, coastal zones, dry plains, and colder regions where shelter depended on what the land offered. A cave was valuable only if it was in the right place, at the right time, and safer than the alternatives. If it was too damp, too exposed at the entrance, too far from needed resources, or already used by animals, it might not be the best answer. The ancient human problem was not finding the one ideal place. It was choosing among imperfect places before darkness made correction difficult. In winter, a rock face could become important simply because it reduced wind from one direction. Wind matters because it strips away the warmer air that gathers close to the body. Even a modest barrier could help the body keep heat a little longer. A line of dense trees could do something similar, breaking the force of moving air and making the night feel less open. But trees alone did not create safety. They could drip moisture, hide hazards, or stand over ground that remained cold and wet. A hollow in the land could feel protected from wind, yet cold air can settle in low places under certain conditions, making the hollow colder than expected. A dry rise might avoid dampness but expose the body to the sky and moving air. Every possible refuge had a cost. In the beginning of human survival, this meant that landscape knowledge had to be detailed, not romantic. The land did not simply protect, it had to be read. The ground itself was one of the most important parts of that reading. A place could look calm and still be dangerous if the surface was wet, frozen, or able to draw heat from the body through the long hours of rest. Dryness mattered because a dry barrier between skin and earth could slow heat loss. Cover mattered because open sky, falling temperature, and wind could make the body work harder. Space mattered because a group needed room to stay close without scattering. Distance mattered because a shelter too far from food, water, fuel, or familiar routes could create new problems the next day. Ancient humans survived by weighing these things together, often through habit rather than formal explanation. A place remembered as good was not simply comfortable. It was a place where bodies had reached morning with enough warmth, strength, and alertness left. This is why natural shelters were not just physical features. They became part of human memory. A rock overhang used many times could become a known pause in a seasonal path. A stand of trees could become associated with calmer nights. A dry patch above damp ground could become worth returning to. Before walls were built, these places formed a scattered living geography of protection. They did not remove winter. They gave the body a slightly better chance to remain warm until light returned. To say that ancient humans used caves or natural shelters is too simple. It makes the past sound cleaner than it was. The deeper truth is that survival depended on reading the landscape, not merely finding a cave and hiding inside it. A cave is easy for a modern mind to picture because it looks like a natural house, with a roof, walls, and an entrance. But real landscapes were more complicated. Many people would have lived where caves were rare, far away, too damp, too dangerous, or simply not useful for the night they were facing. Others may have used rock shelters again and again because those places left stronger traces for archaeologists to find. The evidence we see today is partly shaped by what can survive in the ground. Stone shelters preserve ash, bones, tools, and occupation layers better than open camps exposed to rain, wind, plants, and later disturbance. So when we imagine ancient winter survival, we must be careful. The question is not whether humans always lived in caves. The better question is how they learned to recognize protection wherever the land allowed it. Before houses, the world had to be read through the needs of the body. A place was not good only because it looked covered. It was good if it helped a tired, warm-blooded body lose less heat through the night. It was good if it reduced wind without trapping too much dampness. It was good if the ground could be made less punishing. It was good if the group could remain together, if children could be protected, if people could still respond to changes in the dark. A cave that failed these tests was not truly safe. A simple windbreak in the right position might help more than a dramatic stone chamber in the wrong one. This is why ancient knowledge of terrain was likely subtle. People had to notice direction, surface, moisture, shade, animal movement, and the memory of earlier stops. They had to understand that the same place could change with season, weather, and time of day. A hollow might help during a windy evening and become colder later. A forest edge might break the wind but hold wet ground. A rock wall might shield one side while leaving another side open. Survival came from judging these mixed conditions before the body was exhausted. This connects directly to the beginning of human life, because early humans were not separate from the land in the way a house later makes people feel separate. The land was not outside the shelter. The land was part of the shelter. Stone, slope, trees, dry soil, distance from water, and the shape of the wind all became parts of an invisible structure. The structure was not built once. It was assembled through attention each evening. It existed only as long as people understood how to use it. A group that knew a landscape could carry a kind of map that did not need marks on stone or lines on skin. It lived in memory, where not to stop too late, where cold air seemed to settle, where the ground stayed dry after rain or snow, where the wind softened, where previous nights had ended safely. This knowledge would have been more than convenience. It could protect the chain of generations. A child who could not judge the land alone depended on adults who had already learned it. A young hunter or gatherer might learn by walking behind older people, seeing which places they passed and which they chose. Over time, the repeated reading of terrain became a quiet form of inheritance. Before humans built stable houses, they learned to find unstable shelters in the world itself. They did not live in nature as if nature were kind. They lived by noticing where nature was slightly less dangerous, and by returning to those narrow margins until memory turned them into survival. Fire changed the winter night because it created a small center where the world was no longer equally cold in every direction. Before houses, this mattered deeply. A flame did not become a wall. It did not seal the body away from wind, dampness, or frozen ground, but it could gather people around a warmer point, and that point changed the meaning of darkness. Without fire, the night could feel endless and level, the same cold pressing from the sky, the earth, and the moving air. With fire, the night gained shape. There was a warmer side and a colder side. There was a place to face, a place to return to, a place where hands could regain feeling, where light could soften the dark, and where people could arrange themselves with more intention. This was not comfort in the modern sense. It was not a heated room. It was a fragile zone of life inside a larger cold. The warmth existed only while fuel remained, while someone understood how to keep it alive, and while weather allowed it to matter. That fragility is important because it prevents us from turning fire into a simple answer. Fire helped ancient humans survive winter nights, but it did not erase winter. It created a relationship that had to be maintained. In the long beginning of human life, control of fire was one of the great changes in how our ancestors could deal with the world, though the exact timing and patterns of its use are still debated by researchers. What matters for this question is the principle. Fire allowed heat to exist outside the body. For a species with exposed skin, active brains, vulnerable hands, and a need for sleep, that was a profound shift. Before such outside warmth, the body could only produce heat from itself or borrow it from other bodies and places. A flame offered another source, one that could dry, warm, light, and gather. It made a small area of night more manageable. Yet even around fire, ancient people still had to think about wind direction, smoke, fuel, damp ground, and how close a person could safely rest. A fire in the wrong place might give little warmth. A fire without fuel might fade before the coldest hours. A fire exposed to wind might burn quickly, smoke badly, or fail to warm the resting bodies around it. This is why fire was not just a thing. It was a skill, a responsibility, and a focus of attention. It required knowledge of wood, weather, dryness, timing, and placement. It required people to understand that warmth could disappear if neglected. In a winter night before houses, fire could turn an open place into something closer to a living centre, but only if the group could support it. Around that centre, human behaviour changed. People could gather more closely. The dark could be pushed back a little. Faces, hands, tools, and materials could be seen. Damp items might dry more than they would in cold air alone. The presence of light could change how people listened to the night, how they rested, and how they remained aware of one another. For children, injured people, or those already weakened by fatigue, even a small increase in warmth could matter, but the edges of the fire's circle remained real. Step away from it, and winter returned. Lie on cold ground beside it, and the earth could still pull heat downward, turn the body poorly, and one side might warm while the other stayed exposed. This is what makes fire so central to the story. It did not give ancient humans a house. It gave them a temporary centre around which something like shelter could be organised. Long before a roof held warmth in place, fire helped create a place where warmth could be gathered, guarded, shared, and slowly spent against the dark. A fire in winter was never only a flame. It was a living task. To a modern person, warmth often seems steady once it has been turned on, as if heat belongs to the room itself. But before houses, warmth had to be fed. It had to be watched. It had to be protected from wind, rain, snow, damp fuel, and simple neglect. A fire that glowed at sunset could fade before the coldest part of the night if no one understood how much fuel it needed, what kind of wood burned slowly, how smoke moved, or how weather could weaken it. This is why fire should not be imagined as an easy answer to winter. It was powerful, but it required knowledge. It made a centre of warmth only when people could keep that centre alive. In the deep beginning of human survival, this changed the meaning of night. A group gathered near fire was not simply sitting beside heat. It was organising itself around a fragile source that demanded care from the same tired bodies it helped protect. Someone had to think ahead before darkness. Fuel had to be found, carried, dried when possible, and placed where it could be used. Wood that was too wet might smoke more than it warmed. Small pieces might burn quickly. Larger pieces might be harder to ignite. A fire placed badly might send smoke into resting faces, or lose too much heat to open wind. These problems were not separate from survival. They were part of the same question. How could a human body remain warm enough through hours when movement was limited and the air kept cooling? Fire helped answer that question, but only through practice. The flame itself was not the whole technology. The technology was also the human knowledge around it, where to place it, how to keep it from dying, how close to rest, how to use nearby stone, ground, or windbreaks so warmth did not vanish too quickly, how to keep children near enough to benefit without placing them in danger, how to let exhausted people sleep while the warmth remained guarded. These are the kinds of skills that rarely survive clearly in the ground, yet they belong to the logic of ancient life. Archaeology can sometimes find hearths, charcoal, ash, heated stone, or burned bone, but it cannot easily preserve the night watch, the judgment of an older person, the small correction of fuel before the flame weakened, or the remembered lesson that a certain place made smoke turn back into the sleeping area. The origins of human life were shaped by many such invisible skills. Fire was not just discovered once and then solved forever. It had to be managed again and again, under different skies, with different fuels, in different landscapes. In winter, this management became even more important because cold punished delay. If a fire failed late in the night, the body might already be tired, hands stiff, and judgment slower. The group would then face the cold not at the beginning of rest, but after hours of energy had already been spent. That made preparation valuable. It made fuel a form of stored safety. It made attention a kind of warmth before warmth was needed. Fire also changed relationships within the group. The person tending it was not only helping themselves, they were helping the sleeping child, the injured adult, the older body, the person too exhausted to wake fully, and the group that needed strength for morning. Around fire, winter survival became shared labor. Heat could be gathered in one place, but it could not be owned by one body alone. It spread unevenly, weakened at the edges, and depended on the cooperation of those nearby. This is why the ancient fire at night was both comfort and responsibility. It gave light, warmth, and a small center against darkness, but it also reminded people that survival before houses was never passive. Even rest required maintenance. Even warmth had to be earned slowly through attention, fuel, memory, and care. Fire changed the shape of the winter night, but it did not make the night disappear. This is the careful point we have to hold. A flame could warm hands, dry materials, give light, and gather people into a shared circle, yet the world beyond that circle remained cold. Wind could still move through the resting place. The ground could still draw heat downward. Dampness could still enter coverings, hair, skin, and breath. A person could warm one side of the body while the other side faced the dark. Before houses, fire was not an indoor heating system spread evenly through a sealed room. It was a living center inside an unfinished boundary. Its power was real, but its protection was uneven. This made ancient winter survival more complicated than simply saying humans had fire. To survive the night, people still had to decide where the fire should be placed, how the group should rest around it, how much fuel would be needed, how smoke would move, and how to keep warmth from being wasted into open air. Fire gave humans a new way to fight cold, but it also created new responsibilities. A flame could fail. It could burn too fast. It could smoke heavily. It could be weakened by wet fuel or strong wind. It could draw people close while still leaving their backs, feet, and the ground beneath them exposed. In the deep past, this meant that fire worked best when it was part of a larger pattern of shelter. A rock face, a windbreak, dry ground, gathered material, body closeness, and careful placement could all change how useful the fire became. The flame alone did not create safety. The relationship between flame, land, bodies, and attention created a temporary zone where safety became more possible. This is why fire belongs to the larger story of how humans made small interiors before houses existed. Around a fire, there could be a warmer center and a colder edge. There could be a place where people faced inward, where tools and faces could be seen, where children might be kept closer, where older or weaker bodies could receive more warmth. That arrangement was not a wall, but it had direction. It gave the night a human shape. The cold was no longer everywhere in the same way. It was pushed back, not defeated. Even that pushing back mattered. A few degrees of warmth, a little more dryness, a little more light, a little more time, before the body became deeply chilled could change the outcome of a night. Early humans did not need perfect comfort. They needed enough reduction of danger for the body to reach morning with strength still inside it. Fire also changed the mind's relationship with darkness. A winter night without light could feel wide, uncertain, and difficult to read. A flame made a visible center. It allowed people to see movement nearby, to recognize one another, to adjust materials, to notice when someone shifted too far from warmth, or when fuel had fallen low. In that sense, fire protected not only by heat, but by making attention easier. Yet the same light may also remind us how fragile the situation was. Everything outside the glow remained partly unknown. A fire made a circle, but the circle had edges. Beyond it, the landscape continued. The cold continued. The night continued. This balance is central to human origins. Our ancestors survived not by finding one invention that ended winter, but by combining many incomplete protections until the body had a better chance. Fire was one of the most powerful of these protections because it let warmth exist outside human flesh. Still, it had to be joined with knowledge of terrain, weather, fuel, bodies, and time. Before houses, the winter night was survived through layers. Fire was one layer, bright and living, but it needed other layers around it. It changed the darkness into a place where people could gather, watch, remember, and endure, while the cold waited just beyond the edge of the light. The human body does not only lose warmth to the air, it loses warmth through every place where the cold can touch it for long enough. This is why materials placed around the body became so important before houses. A covering was not simply an object of comfort. It was a way of slowing the movement of heat away from skin. In modern life, this seems obvious, because blankets, coats, shoes, and beds are ordinary. But in deep human history, before woven fabrics, fitted clothing, and permanent rooms became common, the problem was more basic. A warm body needed something between itself and the night. That something might have been animal hide, fur, dry grass, leaves, bark, plant fibers, or other materials gathered from the surrounding world. The exact forms would have differed across places and times, and many soft materials do not survive well in archaeology. But the principle is clear. Humans needed to create a layer that their own bodies did not naturally provide. Compared with many cold-adapted mammals, humans do not carry thick fur across the body. Our skin can sweat, our hands can work with fine control, and our bodies are good at shedding heat during activity, but those same qualities create a problem in winter stillness. A body useful for walking, carrying, making tools, and moving through varied environments is not automatically a body safe for sleeping on cold ground under winter air. The beginning of human winter survival therefore involved more than finding a place. It involved changing the immediate surface around the body. A dry layer could trap a little air. A hide with fur might reduce heat loss. Dry plant material beneath or around a sleeper could make the ground less severe. Even a rough covering could change the speed at which warmth faded. These changes may sound small, but small changes were often the difference between a body losing heat too quickly and a body losing it slowly enough to reach morning. The important idea is not that ancient humans had modern clothing in the way we understand it. It is that they learned to use the world as an added skin. This added skin could be imperfect, heavy, smoky, damp, torn, uneven, or difficult to keep dry. Still, it mattered because the human body needed insulation outside itself. In winter, warmth often depends on holding still air near the body. Moving air carries heat away. Wet material carries heat away more quickly than dry material. Direct contact with cold surfaces pulls warmth from the body hour after hour. Materials that reduce wind, trap air, or separate skin from the ground help slow those losses. Ancient people did not need scientific language for insulation to understand the effect. A body could feel the difference between lying on bare cold earth and lying on something dry. Hands could feel the difference between exposed skin and covered skin. Children could sleep longer when less cold reached them. Adults could wake with more strength when the night had taken less from the body. This connects directly to the older beginning of humanity. Our ancestors survived not by becoming biologically complete against winter, but by extending the body with culture. A stone tool extends the hand. Fire extends internal heat into the world. A covering extends the skin. A dry bed of plant matter extends the body away from the ground. Each extension is small, but together they show the same human pattern. Where biology had limits, behavior created a second layer. Before houses, this second layer was fragile and temporary. It had to be gathered, carried, repaired, dried, shared, and remembered. A hide could become wet, grass could rot, leaves could compress, smoke could cling to materials, wind could shift them. The work of keeping the body covered was therefore not separate from survival. It was survival in a quiet form. Winter night asked the human body to remain warm while sleeping, and the body answered by borrowing protection from animals, plants, soil, fire, and the hands of other humans. Long before a wall held warmth around a family, a smaller wall was being made close to the skin, wherever people learned to place something between flesh and the cold. Animal skins, fur, dry grass, leaves, bark, and plant fibers all mattered, because winter cold does not attack the body in only one way. It comes through air, but also through moisture, wind, and contact with the ground. A covering that helps in dry cold may fail when it becomes wet. A layer that feels useful for a short rest may flatten under the body after many hours. A hide may block wind better than loose plant material, while dry grass or leaves may help separate the sleeper from the earth. Each material had its own weakness, and ancient humans had to learn those weaknesses through use. Before houses, protection around the body was never as simple as placing something over the skin and forgetting the night. It was an ongoing relationship between material, weather, and the living body beneath it. The most important principle was not thickness alone. It was dryness, trapped air, and reduced exposure. Fur can hold air close to the body. Dry plant material can create small pockets that slow the movement of heat. Bark or woven plant matter, where such techniques existed, could help block wind or separate a person from damp ground. But water changes everything. Wet material loses much of its protective value because moisture carries heat away more efficiently. A damp covering can become heavy, cold, and difficult to dry. A wet sleeping surface can make the body work harder all night. In the deep beginning of human survival, this meant that keeping materials dry may have been as important as finding them in the first place. A group could have coverings, bedding, or useful plant matter, yet still suffer if rain, snow, ground moisture, or smoke made those materials less effective. This is one reason the place of rest, fire, and body coverings cannot be separated. They worked together. A rock shelter might keep materials drier. A fire might help dry them, though not without smoke and effort. A dry rise might make plant bedding more useful. A place out of the wind might allow a lighter covering to help more than it would in open air. The body, the material, and the landscape formed one system. Ancient people did not need modern words for heat transfer to know the difference. They could feel when a covering trapped warmth and when it did not. They could feel when the ground pulled cold through a thin layer. They could notice that a child slept better when surrounded by softer, drier material. They could remember that a wet hide, a damp bed of leaves, or a smoky pile of fuel changed the whole night. Such knowledge would have been practical, repeated, and local. The materials available in one region were not the same as in another. Cold grasslands, forests, tundra-like edges, rocky valleys, and coastal places each offered different possibilities. Some groups may have relied more on animal skins. Others may have used plant bedding, brush, bark, or combinations of what the environment provided. The exact details are often difficult to prove because organic materials decay. Stone tools and bones remain more easily than soft bedding, leather, fibers, and leaves, but the human need behind them is clear. A body with little natural insulation needed a way to hold warmth near itself, especially during sleep. This need links directly back to the origin of human adaptation. Our ancestors were not simply animals wrapped in nature. They became animals who rearranged nature around their own vulnerability. A hide was not just the remains of an animal. Dry grass was not just ground cover. Leaves were not just forest debris. In the cold night, these things became parts of a human-made surface between life and exposure. They were humble materials, but they changed the distance between skin and winter. Before houses, that distance was everything. It could be no thicker than a layer of dry grass, no stronger than a hide kept from dampness, no more stable than a covering adjusted in the dark. Yet in those small layers, ancient humans began to do what houses would later do on a larger scale. Slow the loss of warmth, soften the force of weather, and give the sleeping body a better chance to remain alive until morning. The human body entered winter with a strange disadvantage. It was intelligent, social, skillful, and highly adaptable, yet it did not carry the kind of natural covering that makes cold sleep easy. Human skin was not enough. Human hands were useful because they were sensitive, but that sensitivity made cold more painful and more limiting. Human feet could travel far, but they could also lose warmth far from the body's center. Human children were born dependent, unable to protect their own heat for long. The body had gifts, but winter exposed the price of those gifts. This is where culture became more than an idea. It became a second body around the first one. Before houses, ancient humans had to make up for what biology did not give them. They could not simply wait for evolution to grow a winter coat over their skin. They had to use what they could find, remember, carry, shape, dry, share, and place around themselves. A covering, a bed of dry material, a windbreak, a position near others, a remembered shelter, or a carefully kept fire, all belonged to this larger human answer. Each one added something the naked body lacked. None of them was perfect, but together they formed a living substitute for fur, walls, floors, and rooms. In the beginning of human life, this may have been one of the deepest meanings of adaptation. The body survived by moving part of its protection outside itself. A hide over the shoulders did not change the skin, but it changed what the skin had to face. Dry grass beneath the body did not change the ground, but it changed how quickly the ground could steal warmth. A group sleeping close together did not remove the cold, but it changed the way warmth was shared and guarded. This is why winter nights before houses were not simply battles between people and weather. They were moments when human beings used culture to complete an unfinished body. The same body that was vulnerable to cold could make tools. The same hands that stiffened in winter could prepare coverings. The same mind that slowed when chilled could remember, before the worst cold came, what had worked on earlier nights. The same social bonds that made humans dependent on one another also allowed knowledge to move between generations. A child did not need to understand every danger alone. The child could be placed where others knew warmth was more likely to last. A young adult could learn which materials became useless when wet, which ground should be avoided, and why a small layer beneath the body might matter as much as a covering above it. These details may seem humble, but they belong to the root of human survival. Civilization did not begin only when people built large structures. Something older was already happening each time a group rearranged the world around its fragile bodies. Winter made this rearrangement urgent. It showed that human life depended not only on strength, but on preparation. It rewarded those who noticed small differences before they became dangerous. It made dry material valuable. It made shared memory valuable. It made care valuable. If ancient humans had possessed bodies fully suited to sleeping in winter without help, they might not have needed such careful layers of behavior. But because the body was open to cold, the group had to become protective. The weakness of skin became a reason to gather materials. The weakness of children became a reason to organize sleep. The weakness of tired adults became a reason to choose the right place before dark. In this way, the cold did not only threaten human beings, it helped reveal what kind of beings they were becoming. Animals whose survival depended on turning memory, material, and cooperation into warmth. Before houses held heat around a whole family, culture had already begun doing that work close to the skin. The cold beneath the body may have been one of the most underestimated dangers of winter night before houses. When people imagine ancient cold, they often picture wind on the face, snow in the air, or darkness around a fire. But a sleeping body does not only face the air, it also gives part of itself to the surface below. The ground is patient. It does not need to move. It does not need to strike. It simply waits under the ribs, hips, shoulders, back, legs, and feet, drawing warmth away through long contact. A person standing in cold air can stamp the feet, walk, shift weight, or turn away from wind. A person lying down has more of the body pressed toward the earth and sleep makes that contact last. Before beds, raised floors, thick mattresses, and insulated rooms, this was a serious problem. The night could be survivable above, and still dangerous below. A flame might warm the front of the body, while frozen or damp ground continued to take heat from the back. A covering might reduce the bite of air, while the surface beneath quietly weakened the whole effort. This is why the question of ancient winter survival cannot be answered only by looking upward towards sky and wind. It must also look downward, toward the place where the tired body finally stopped. In deep human history, the act of lying down was not neutral. It changed the body's relationship with cold. The warm center of a person became closer to a surface that might be colder than the surrounding air. If that surface was wet, the danger increased, because moisture carries heat away more easily. If it was frozen, stone, bare soil, or cold sand, the body could lose warmth steadily. Even dry ground could become costly when contact lasted for many hours. Ancient humans may not have described this in technical language, but they would have known the feeling. One place leaves the body stiff by morning, another lets sleep last a little longer. One surface turns cold through the hips and back, another, softened by dry leaves, grass, hides, brush, or raised material, gives the body a slightly better chance. These differences mattered because winter survival was often about slowing loss, not eliminating it. The body could afford some loss of warmth. It could not afford endless loss without answer. The ground made that lesson clear. A poor surface could keep taking even while the air seemed calm. It could undo part of what fire, clothing, and closeness were trying to preserve. That is why bedding in its earliest forms was not a luxury. It was a protective layer between life and the earth. Dry grass, leaves, reeds, branches, bark, hides, or other available materials could separate the body from direct contact. Even if such layers were thin or uneven, they changed the rate of loss. They trapped air. They reduced dampness. They made the body less exposed to the cold stored in the ground. Many of these materials decay, leaving little behind for archaeology, but the need for them follows from the body itself. A warm-blooded human cannot sleep safely in winter by thinking only about the air. The ground beneath sleep is part of the night. This connects back to the beginning of human shelter. A house would later lift the body into a more controlled space, with floors, beds, walls, and roofs separating skin from weather. Before that, ancient humans had to create smaller separations wherever they could. A layer beneath the body was like a quiet floor before floors existed. It did not look grand. It did not announce itself as invention, but it answered one of the oldest human questions. How can a body rest without letting the earth take too much warmth before morning? To survive a winter night before houses, ancient humans had to think not only about what covered the body, but what held the body away from the ground. A person could have warmth near the face and still lose heat through the back. A group could have a calmer place out of the wind and still suffer if the surface beneath them was wet, frozen, or bare. This is why the simplest sleeping surface may have carried deep importance. A layer of dry grass, leaves, reeds, bark, branches, hides, or other available material could change the whole meaning of rest. It did not need to be soft in the modern sense. It needed to interrupt contact. It needed to place something between warm flesh and cold earth. Before beds existed, this was already a kind of bed, not as furniture, but as a survival technique. The body lying down becomes wider against the world. More surface touches what is below. The longer that contact lasts, the more the body must defend itself. A dry layer beneath the sleeper could trap small pockets of air. It could keep dampness away from skin or covering. It could reduce the sharp pressure of stone or frozen soil. It could help the body remain just warm enough to continue sleeping, rather than waking again and again in discomfort. These changes may sound modest, but ancient winter survival was often built from modest changes. A little less wind, a little less dampness, a little more distance from the ground, a little more warmth held near the body. None of these alone created safety. Together, they could reduce the night's cost. In the deep beginning of human life, such small arrangements may have been repeated so often that they became ordinary knowledge. People did not have to invent the idea each evening from nothing. They could remember which materials worked better when dry, which crushed too quickly, which held moisture, which smoked near fire, which could be gathered before darkness, and which places already offered a better base. Dryness was central. A thick layer that became wet could become worse than a thinner layer kept dry. Moisture could make plant material collapse, make hides heavy, and draw heat away from the body. A dry place and a dry layer helped each other. This is why choosing the ground and preparing the ground were not separate acts. A good surface began with the land, then continued with what people placed upon it. Ancient humans also had to consider how the body rested. Curling inward reduced exposed surface. Keeping limbs closer to the warm center helped protect fingers and toes. Resting near others could reduce exposure and share some warmth. A child placed poorly might lose heat faster than an adult. An injured person might not be able to shift when cold reached one side of the body. The sleeping arrangement itself became part of protection. It was not only about objects. It was about distance, position, contact, and timing. This connects directly to the long path toward houses. A house eventually gives the body a stable floor, a controlled roof, and walls that make bedding more effective. Before that, people had to build the floor first in a temporary way, wherever the night found them. A prepared surface said something important about being human. It said that rest was not just collapse. Rest had to be made possible. The body could not simply fall onto the earth and trust winter to spare it. It needed a small human-made layer, a chosen pause, a memory of what cold ground could do. Long before mattresses, platforms, and rooms, ancient humans were already learning that survival through the night depended on what lay beneath them as much as what covered them from above. Before houses, sleep itself had to be learned as a survival skill. Today, sleep is often treated as the moment when effort stops. A person lies down, closes the eyes, and trusts the room to remain stable. The floor will not freeze the body. The roof will not vanish. The walls will keep wind from crossing the skin. But ancient humans could not assume that rest meant safety. In winter, lying down was not the end of work. It was a different kind of work, quieter and slower, built into the way bodies were placed, covered, watched, and protected from the ground. This is why the winter night before houses was such a deep human problem. The body needed sleep to restore strength, but the conditions of sleep could also take strength away. A person who rested badly might reach morning alive, but weaker, slower, colder, and less able to face the next day. Over time that mattered. One poor night could be endured. Many poor nights could shape a season. Many hard seasons could shape the habits of a group. The beginning of human survival was not only about finding food, making tools, or moving across landscapes. It was also about making sleep possible in a world that did not offer sleep kindly. A safe enough sleeping place had to solve several problems at once. It had to reduce wind, avoid damp ground, keep bodies close enough to benefit from shared warmth, hold materials in place, and allow exhausted people to rest without losing too much heat. If one part failed, the whole night could become harder. A covering above the body helped less if the ground below kept drawing warmth away. A dry layer beneath the body helped less if wind stripped heat from every exposed side. A good position near others helped less if dampness slowly entered the bedding. Ancient sleep was therefore not one act, but an arrangement. It was the careful placing of fragile bodies inside a temporary pattern of protection. This arrangement probably changed with weather, season, available materials, and the needs of the group. A strong adult might tolerate more cold than a child. An older person might need a better place because the body had less energy to spend. Someone injured or hungry might lose warmth faster or fail to wake easily when conditions worsened. The group had to rest, but it also had to keep vulnerability in mind. That is why sleep before houses was never purely private. The body slept, but the group made sleep more possible. The knowledge of where to lie, what to put beneath the body, how close to remain, when to adjust the fire if there was one, and when a place had become too cold belonged to shared life. This is one of the quiet roots of human society. We often think of society beginning with speech, tools, rituals, or settlements. But there is another beginning, the need to protect sleeping bodies. A sleeping human is powerful in one sense, because sleep repairs the brain and restores the body. But a sleeping human is also exposed. The eyes are closed, movement slows, judgment rests. In winter, that exposure became more serious. Before houses, the sleeping body depended on knowledge gathered before sleep began. It depended on the right ground, the right distance from others, the right material beneath it, the right response if the night changed. To survive winter nights, ancient humans had to create a small temporary world where sleep could happen without surrendering too much warmth. This was not yet a bedroom, not yet a bed, not yet a house. It was something older and humbler, a place on the earth made slightly less dangerous by attention. Long before architecture separated humans from weather, the first form of shelter may have been a sleeping body placed carefully enough to greet the morning. A winter night before houses did not test only one body. It tested the distance between bodies. A person alone could feel cold, shiver, curl inward, and try to endure, but a group could do something more important. A group could arrange itself. It could notice who was colder, who was tired, who could not move easily, who needed to be nearer to warmth, and who had enough strength to remain alert a little longer. This is why cold reveals something deep about human origins. It shows that survival was never only a private matter. The body felt winter individually, but the answer often had to be social. Before walls held warmth in one place, people themselves helped create the first warmer spaces. Not by magic, and not by complete safety, but by closeness, attention, and shared memory. A body resting near another body loses heat differently from a body resting alone in open air. A child placed between adults has a different chance than a child left at the edge of exposure. A tired person who cannot judge the night well may survive because someone else still notices the wind, the fire, the ground, or the shifting cold. In the deep beginning of human life, this mattered because no one stayed strong all the time. A hunter could become injured, a gatherer could become exhausted, a child could become chilled quickly, an older person could carry valuable knowledge but have less physical reserve. A pregnant woman, a sick adult, or someone hungry after a difficult season might have a narrower margin than the strongest members of the group. Winter made those differences visible. It forced the group to respond not to an imaginary average body, but to real bodies with different needs. This is one reason human cooperation was not simply kindness added to survival. It was part of survival itself. To pass through winter nights, people had to make vulnerability less fatal. They had to create conditions where more than the strongest could reach morning. That does not mean ancient life was gentle or perfectly protective. It means that groups able to notice, remember, and arrange themselves around danger had a better chance of continuing. The cold encouraged practical forms of care. Staying near one another could reduce exposure. Sharing a protected place could make the chosen shelter more effective. Watching over a fire, if one was present, could help those who slept. Moving a child, adjusting a covering, recognizing that someone was too cold, or choosing a place that worked for the weakest rather than only the strongest were all small acts with large consequences. Many of these acts would leave no clear trace in the ground. Archaeology may find stone tools, hearths, bones, or occupation layers, but it cannot easily show how close people slept, who woke during the night, who gave up the better position, or who remembered a safer place from a winter long before. Yet the logic of the human body points toward these social arrangements. A species with dependent children, exposed skin, long learning, and shared knowledge could not face winter as a collection of isolated individuals. The group became part of the shelter. This idea brings the question back to the beginning of humanity. Before houses, there was already an inside and an outside, but that inside was not made of walls. It was made of relationship. Inside meant nearer to others, nearer to remembered safety, nearer to warmth, nearer to someone who could respond if the night changed. Outside meant not only beyond a structure, but beyond attention, beyond shared heat, beyond the protection of the group. Winter nights made that boundary important. They taught, again and again, that a human body was more likely to survive when it belonged to a circle of other bodies. The oldest shelter may not have been a place at all. It may have been the group gathered close enough for one person's warmth, memory, and watchfulness to protect another. Sharing warmth was not only a feeling of comfort. In a winter night before houses, it could become part of how a group stayed alive. A single body produces heat, but a single body also loses heat quickly when surrounded by cold air, cold ground, and darkness. Several bodies close together change the small space between them. They reduce exposed surfaces. They make it harder for moving air to reach every side. They allow the warmth of one person to help another, especially when one body is smaller, weaker, colder, or more tired. This did not make the night easy. It did not turn an open camp into a room, but it changed the cost of waiting for morning. Before houses, the human group itself could become a kind of moving shelter, one made not from walls, but from nearness. This was especially important because winter did not treat all bodies equally. A strong adult might still shiver and endure. A child could lose heat faster. An injured person might not be able to move when cold reached the limbs. An older person might have knowledge that helped the group survive, yet still need a better place to rest. In such a world, closeness was practical. The arrangement of bodies could become a quiet technology. Who rested near the warmer center, who stayed closer to the edge, who could wake more easily, who needed protection from the ground or wind, all of this could matter through the night. The beginning of human life was shaped by these small arrangements because survival had to include more than the strongest individual. It had to include the group's future. Watchfulness also belonged to this shared survival. A winter night does not remain the same from sunset to dawn. Wind may shift. A fire may weaken. A covering may loosen. A child may roll away from warmth. Dampness may become more noticeable after hours of lying still. Someone already cold may become quieter rather than more active. These changes could be missed if every person slept as deeply as possible. Before houses, rest may often have required a lighter relationship with the night, a pattern in which the group slept, but not as if the world had vanished. One person waking, listening, tending warmth, or adjusting a sleeping place could protect several others. This kind of care would leave almost no direct trace in the earth, yet it fits the logic of the human body. A sleeping group in winter needed more than heat. It needed attention. It needed someone to notice when the fragile balance was changing. Experience made this attention stronger. A young person might know the cold as discomfort. An older person might know its sequence. First the hands become stiff, then the body curls tighter, then judgment slows, then a person may stop responding well. Such knowledge could guide the group before danger became obvious. It could shape when to gather more fuel, when to move someone closer, when to improve the layer beneath a body, or when a place chosen before dark was no longer good enough. In the deep past, this knowledge was not written. It lived in memory, posture, gesture, and routine. The group carried winter inside its habits. This is why ancient survival before houses cannot be imagined only through objects. Fire, hides, bedding, rock shelters, and dry ground mattered, but they worked best inside a social pattern. A hide could cover one body, but a person had to know who needed it most. Fire could warm a circle, but someone had to keep that circle alive. A good place could reduce wind, but the group had to arrange itself within that place. Human beings survived winter nights by combining warmth with awareness. They shared heat, but also shared the responsibility of noticing when heat was leaving. Long before a house held a family in one protected space, a group of ancient humans may have done something similar with their bodies, their memory, and their care. They made a temporary inside by staying near enough that no one had to face the cold completely alone. A single person can survive a cold night by strength, luck, and skill, but a species cannot survive winter that way for long. This is the deeper point hidden inside the question of ancient winter nights. Human life continued not because every individual could endure the cold alone, but because groups carried one another through the conditions that no single body could always handle. A lone adult might find a dry place, keep moving, guard a small warmth, and reach morning. But human survival was never only the survival of one adult. It had to include children who could not yet understand danger, older people whose experience mattered, injured bodies that could not move easily, hungry bodies with less energy to spend, and tired bodies that might sleep too deeply at the wrong moment. Winter exposed all of these differences. It showed that the future of the group depended on protecting more than the strongest. Before houses, this made community part of the shelter itself. The group was not an extra comfort added after survival. It was one of the ways survival happened. One body could warm another. One person's attention could protect another person's sleep. One elder's memory could guide a younger person away from a place that looked harmless but became cruel after midnight. One adult could notice a child growing too quiet or too far from warmth. These small acts created a living boundary against the cold. They were not dramatic, and they may leave no clear mark in the ground, but they belong to the oldest logic of human life. The body alone was vulnerable. The group made that vulnerability less final. This is why ancient winter survival cannot be understood as a contest between heroic individuals and harsh weather. It was more like a careful arrangement of unequal bodies around a shared danger. Some people could give more warmth, more watchfulness, more memory, or more labour. Others needed more protection. That imbalance was not a failure of the group. It was the condition of being human. Human infants are born deeply dependent. Human childhood is long. Human knowledge takes years to learn. Older people may carry memories that younger bodies do not yet have. If winter destroyed only the weak, it would still damage the future, because the weak were not separate from the group's continuation. The child was tomorrow. The injured person might recover. The older person might know where to stop, when to move, or how to read a change in weather. In the deep beginning of human life, survival meant keeping the chain intact. A group that could protect its vulnerable members preserved not only bodies, but knowledge, relationships, and future generations. Winter nights made that preservation urgent. They asked whether warmth could be shared, whether attention could be divided, whether memory could become habit, and whether the needs of one body could be held inside the care of many. Before houses, the first human shelter may have looked like people gathered close in a chosen place, with the cold pressing at the edges and the group holding a small center together. A wall protects by standing still. A group protects by responding. It shifts, wakes, remembers, gathers, covers, and arranges. It notices that one person is colder than another. It learns that no body should be treated as if it has the same strength every night. This social shelter was fragile, but it was alive. It could move with a group across landscapes. It could survive when no permanent structure existed. And it reveals something essential about how ancient humans endured winter before houses. One person could fight the cold for a night, but only a community could carry human life through winter after winter, long enough for the morning to become a future. The question of ancient winter survival becomes most serious when we stop imagining only strong adults around a fire and begin to see the people who had the least protection inside their own bodies. A group was not made only of those who could walk far, carry heavy loads, gather fuel, or stay awake through the hardest hours. It also included children, infants, older people, injured people, sick people, and adults whose strength had been reduced by hunger or exhaustion. Winter night revealed the true shape of a human group because it pressed hardest on those with the smallest margins. A healthy adult might shiver, adjust position, or move closer to warmth. A small child could lose heat faster and understand danger less clearly. An older person might know where safety was more likely to be found, yet have less reserve against cold. Someone injured might not be able to rise, shift, or help maintain a fire. Before houses, these differences mattered every time the light faded. Survival was not proven by whether the strongest person could endure a night. It was proven by whether the group could carry its more vulnerable bodies through the hours when cold kept taking from them. This is one of the deepest reasons winter belongs to human history, not only to climate. It forced early humans to organize life around dependency. Human infants are not born ready to follow the group on their own. They need warmth, carrying, feeding, protection, and long care. Childhood lasts for years, and during those years knowledge slowly enters the body through watching, listening, and being kept alive by others. A child who survived winter did not do so by personal skill alone. The child survived because adults knew where to stop, how to arrange bodies, how to reduce wind, how to guard warmth, and how to notice danger before the child could name it. In that sense, every winter night was also a test of the future. If children could not be brought through the cold, the group's tomorrow became thinner. If older people were lost too easily, memory itself could be weakened. The body of an elder might not be the strongest body in the group, but an elder could carry maps of weather, seasons, places, mistakes, and safe returns. In deep human life, survival was not only muscle, it was remembered pattern. It was knowing that one valley became damp after sunset, that one slope caught wind, that one kind of ground stole warmth, that one stop had failed before. Winter made such knowledge valuable because the danger repeated. A younger body might have strength, but strength without memory could choose poorly. An older body might move more slowly, but memory could protect many. This creates a quiet reversal in the way we think about survival. The weak were not simply burdens, and the strong were not simply saviors. Each body held a different role in the chain. Children carried the future. Older people carried accumulated experience. Injured people, if protected, could return to usefulness. Mothers and caregivers held the fragile center of new life. The group had to remain wide enough to include these differences, or it would become a gathering of individuals with no lasting continuity. Before houses, winter made that truth visible. A protected place had to be chosen not for the body that could bear the most cold, but for the body that could bear the least. A layer beneath the sleeper mattered more for a child. A place away from dampness mattered more for the tired and thin. Shared warmth mattered more for those who could not make enough heat alone. The beginning of human society may be seen here, in the simple fact that survival required attention to unequal vulnerability. A winter night did not ask whether a person deserved warmth. It asked whether warmth could be kept near those who needed it before the loss became too great. Long before houses enclosed families inside walls, human groups had to build a smaller enclosure from care, closeness, memory, and choice. The most fragile bodies were not outside the story of winter survival. They were the center of it, because a group that could protect only its strongest members could live for a night, but not for generations. To protect the next generation through winter, ancient humans had to solve a problem that was both biological and social. A child's body is small, and small bodies can lose heat quickly. Infants and young children cannot always explain what is happening to them, cannot always move towards safety on their own, and cannot judge when cold is becoming dangerous. Before houses, this made them deeply dependent on the decisions of others. They needed to be carried, placed, covered, watched, and kept near warmth before the night became too severe. A winter evening was therefore not only a question of where adults would sleep, it was a question of where the future of the group could safely rest. This changes the meaning of shelter. A shelter was not good merely because a strong adult could tolerate it. It had to work for the body that could tolerate the least. If the ground was too cold, a child would feel it sooner. If wind entered a resting place, a child at the edge would suffer more. If coverings were damp, if fuel was low, if people were too scattered, the smallest bodies would show the weakness of the whole arrangement. In the deep beginning of human life, the survival of children through winter meant that adults had to think ahead. They had to prepare before crying. Silence, stiffness, or exhaustion made the problem urgent. The protection of children likely shaped how groups arranged themselves at night. A child might be placed between warmer bodies, closer to a protected center, nearer to a source of heat, or on better material above the ground. These are simple possibilities, not a single fixed rule for all ancient people. Different groups in different environments would have used different methods, but the need behind them was constant. A young body could not be left to solve winter alone. The group had to become the child's outer layer. Adult bodies, coverings, dry material, remembered places, and night watchfulness all worked together to reduce the child's exposure. This is one of the quietest forms of human survival, because it does not look heroic. It looks like placement. It looks like closeness. It looks like waking when someone smaller has moved away from warmth. It looks like giving the better protected position to the body with less strength. Yet such acts mattered because human life depends on long childhood. A species with a long learning period cannot survive only by producing children. It must keep them alive long enough for knowledge to enter them. The child who is protected through winter becomes the young person who learns where to sleep, what ground to avoid, how wind behaves, and why warmth must be guarded. In this way, each protected child carries the memory of care forward, even before that memory becomes conscious. Winter survival was not only the preservation of flesh, it was the preservation of learning. The same was true for pregnant women and caregivers. A group that could not protect those carrying or feeding young life would face danger beyond one cold night. Winter pressed against the chain of generations. It asked whether the group could keep warmth near those through whom the future would pass. This does not mean ancient communities were always gentle or safe by modern standards. Life could be harsh, resources limited, and choices difficult. But the basic human pattern is clear. Survival through cold required more than individual toughness. It required the group to recognize dependency as part of reality. Before houses, protecting the next generation may have been one of the earliest reasons people learned to make a small inside within the outside world. The child in winter needed something like a house before houses existed, a protected center made from bodies, material, memory, and care. And every child who reached morning carried the group one step farther through time. The survival of a winter night was never only the survival of breathing bodies, it was also the survival of memory. A group that reached morning with its children, elders, caregivers, and injured members still present had preserved more than life for one more day. It had preserved the knowledge needed to face the next night. This is easy to miss because the cold seems to test the body first. We imagine skin, hands, feet, breath, shivering, hunger, and sleep. But behind all of those things was a quieter chain. What one generation had learned, another generation still needed to receive. Before houses, that chain could be fragile. A child protected from the cold did not only remain alive. That child remained able to learn the paths, the winds, the dry places, the dangers of damp ground, the use of coverings, the timing of fire, and the meaning of staying near others when night came down. An older person, protected through winter, did not only continue breathing, that person kept carrying memories that younger bodies might not yet have earned. The group survived by keeping these links from breaking too easily. This gives winter nights a deeper meaning in human history. They were not only natural obstacles, they were moments when care became part of adaptation. A species with long childhood, shared learning, and social dependence cannot treat every vulnerable body as expendable without harming its own future. The young need protection before they can become skilled. The old may need protection because they have already become skilled. The injured may need protection because today's weakness does not define tomorrow's usefulness. The caregiver may need protection because the life of another body depends on them. In this way, the cold made human society visible. It showed that survival was not a simple line from strength to life. It was a web where one person's warmth, memory, attention, or labor could help another person remain inside the group. In the deep beginning of human life, this web may have been as important as any tool. A stone tool could cut, a fire could warm, a dry layer could separate a sleeper from the ground, but care decided how those things were shared, who received them first, and whether the group arranged itself around the bodies that needed help most. Winter forced these choices into the open. If a child was placed too far from warmth, the whole future was touched. If an elder with valuable memory was lost, the map of past winters became thinner. If the sick or injured were abandoned too easily, the group lost not only a person, but the possibility of recovery, relationship, and knowledge. This does not mean ancient life was gentle in a romantic way. The past was hard, and not every person could be saved. But the repeated survival of human groups suggests that care was not rare decoration added to life after danger passed. Care was one of the ways danger was managed. It was a practical answer to the limits of the body. Before houses, warmth had to be placed where it mattered. Attention had to be given before weakness became silence. The best protected position, the driest layer, the closest place to others, the warning remembered from an earlier winter, these could become tools of continuity. A group that learned to protect its vulnerable members was not only being kind, it was keeping alive the slow human process by which experience becomes guidance and childhood becomes adulthood. Winter nights, therefore, teach us something quiet about the origin of human beings. We did not survive only because we were clever or strong or able to make fire or able to use materials. We survived because those abilities could be gathered around bodies that could not always protect themselves. Before houses held families under one roof, human beings had already begun to hold one another inside a moving shelter of memory, warmth, and care. And through that shelter, the night did not end the story. It carried the story forward. What remains from an ancient winter night is never the whole night. The cold itself leaves no shape. The breath that rose in the dark is gone. The closeness of sleeping bodies is gone. The fear of damp ground, the careful turning toward warmth, the quiet waking when a flame weakened, all of that disappears almost completely. What archaeology can sometimes hold is more limited. Stone tools, bones, charcoal, ash, heated earth, traces of hearths, marks of repeated occupation, or the protected layers inside caves and rock shelters. These remains are valuable, but they are not the same as the lived experience. They are the hard edges left behind after the soft parts of survival have vanished. This is why we have to approach the question carefully. We can ask how ancient humans survived winter nights before houses, but we cannot pretend that every detail is visible. The evidence is uneven. Stone lasts, bone may last, charcoal may last. A place protected by rock may preserve a floor where people returned many times. But hides, grass, leaves, bark, fibres, wooden windbreaks, body heat, care, and memory often leave little or no direct trace. The very things that may have made a winter night survivable were often the easiest things for time to erase. This does not make the question impossible. It makes it more delicate. A hearth, for example, can tell us that fire was used in a place, but it cannot tell us exactly how people slept around it. Burned bone or charcoal can suggest repeated activity, but not the full arrangement of bodies, coverings, wind and ground. A cave layer can show that humans occupied a sheltered place, but it does not mean all humans lived in caves, or that the cave was always warm, safe, or used in the same way. Open-air camps may have been common, but they are more easily disturbed by weather, plants, erosion, and later human activity. In deep human history, what survives is partly shaped by where preservation was possible. This means that the archaeological record can quietly favour stone, fire, and caves, while underrepresenting the temporary shelters and soft materials that may have mattered every night. To stay truthful, we have to hold both sides at once. We know humans used fire in many ancient contexts. We know they made tools, processed animals, moved through landscapes, and occupied protected places when available. We know later humans developed clothing, bedding, shelters, and complex ways of living in cold environments. But for the deepest past, the exact details are often debated or incomplete. What we can say with confidence is that a warm-blooded, relatively hairless social species could not survive repeated winter nights by ignoring exposure. The body would have required ways to reduce heat loss, avoid dampness, manage wind, use group closeness, and protect sleep. The traces in the ground give us pieces. The body gives us the logic that connects those pieces. This is where the origin of human survival becomes both scientific and humble. We are not inventing a romantic scene. We are reading from what remains, and from what the human body needs in cold. A patch of ash may point to warmth and light. A cluster of bones may point to food, activity, and perhaps repeated use of a place. A stone shelter may point to reduced exposure. A lack of preserved bedding does not mean bedding did not exist. It may only mean that soft survival rarely survives. The ancient winter night is therefore partly visible and partly missing. Its most important lesson may be that human life was built from many fragile supports, and time has kept only a few of them. The things that helped ancient humans most during winter nights may be the very things we are least able to see today. Stone tools can remain, charcoal can remain, burned bone can remain. A cave floor may preserve layers where people returned again and again, but a hide laid over cold ground can vanish. Dry grass used as bedding can decay. Leaves gathered beneath a child can disappear without leaving a clear mark. Wooden branches arranged against wind can rot, scatter, or burn away. The warmth of bodies close together leaves no fossil. The decision to place a weaker person nearer to protection leaves no simple artifact. The silence of a group listening through the coldest hours leaves nothing a hand can excavate. This missing evidence is not a small problem. It shapes how we imagine the past. When the soft parts disappear, the hard parts can seem more important than they were alone. We may see the stone and forget the skin. We may see the hearth and forget the people who had to keep it useful. We may see a rock shelter and forget the temporary layers of plant material, hide, memory, and care that made resting there possible. Before houses, survival was likely built from many perishable things. Organic materials are fragile in most environments. Unless conditions are unusually dry, frozen, waterlogged, or otherwise protective, they decay. This means that early clothing, bedding, windbreaks, carrying materials, ties, wraps, and sleeping surfaces may be underrepresented in what survives. Their absence from a site does not always mean people did not use them. It may mean that time has been selective. Time often protects stone better than softness, and yet winter survival depended deeply on softness. A body in the cold needs layers that bend, cover, cushion, trap air, and separate skin from ground. Those are exactly the kinds of materials most easily lost. This is why we have to be careful not to build a picture of ancient winter only from what is durable. A sharp tool may tell us how an animal was processed, but it does not show the later use of hide near a sleeping body. A hearth may show controlled burning, but not whether damp coverings were dried nearby. A cluster of remains may show repeated occupation, but not who slept where, who woke first, or how the young were kept near warmth. The origin of human survival lies partly in this invisible zone between evidence and necessity. We cannot fill it with fantasy, but we also should not ignore what the body would have required. A relatively hairless, warm-blooded, social animal sleeping through winter nights needed more than courage. It needed dry barriers, reduced wind, shared heat, and remembered places. Many of those answers would have been made from materials that disappear. Even footprints, sleeping impressions, and the arrangement of bodies would usually be erased by weather, later occupation, animals, and time. What remains is therefore not a full picture, but a broken outline. We see the durable frame, not the warmth that once moved through it. We see traces of fire, not the long night around the fire. We see stone, not the hands stiffened by cold before they used it. We see bone, not the careful placement of a child between warmer bodies. This does not weaken the story. It makes the story more honest. Ancient winter survival was not only a record of objects, it was a record of actions repeated so often that they became ordinary, then disappeared because ordinary actions do not always preserve well. Before houses, the most important shelter may have been made each night from things that time does not respect. Dry leaves, animal skins, smoke, body heat, memory, and care. To be honest about ancient winter nights, we have to accept a kind of double vision. We can see some things clearly, and other things only by their outline. We can see fire in the form of ash, charcoal, heated stones, or burned bone. We can see stone tools that suggest cutting, scraping, processing, and repeated activity. We can see places where humans returned, especially where caves, rock shelters, or buried surfaces protected traces from being erased. We can compare these traces with what the human body needs in cold, warmth, dryness, reduced wind, food energy, sleep, and protection from the ground. But between the evidence and the living night, there is always space. That space must not be filled carelessly. It must be approached slowly, with the understanding that the past is not a blank page for imagination, and not a complete record either. The most truthful answer is often built from both restraint and logic. We should not claim to know exactly how every ancient group slept, how every fire was kept, or how every child was protected. Different humans lived in different climates, landscapes, and periods. Some faced mild winters, others severe cold. Some had access to caves, others did not. Some may have relied more on animal skins, others on plants, terrain, fire, or movement. The human story was not one method repeated everywhere, yet the larger pattern remained strong. Before houses, survival required reducing exposure. The body could not ignore winter. It had to keep heat near the core, avoid too much dampness, rest without losing too much warmth to the ground, and protect those with less strength. These needs come from biology, not fantasy. The archaeological record gives us fragments, and the body tells us why those fragments matter. A hearth is not only burned material. In a winter context, it suggests a place where heat and light could be organized. A stone shelter is not only a geological feature, it suggests reduced exposure, though never perfect safety. Cut marks on bone or tools used on hides may point toward the processing of animals, but they do not always tell us exactly how skins were used afterward. Traces of occupation show that humans stayed in places, but they do not preserve the full arrangement of sleep, warmth, and care. This is where careful interpretation matters. We can speak of possibilities that fit the evidence and the body, while avoiding certainty where the evidence is thin. That kind of honesty is not weakness. It makes the story stronger. It prevents us from turning ancient humans into a simple image of cave people around endless fire, or into modern people without houses. They were neither. They were human beings living with real limits, real skills, and real environments. Their winter survival was probably made from layers: landscape choice, fire when available and controlled, body coverings, ground insulation, shared warmth, timing, memory, and care for vulnerable members. Some layers left traces, others vanished. But the fact that humans continued through cold periods tells us that enough of these layers worked, often enough, across many generations. The origin of human shelter, then, was not a single object we can point to in the ground. It was a practical relationship between evidence we can see and necessities we can infer. It was the repeated human effort to make the night less dangerous without pretending the night had been conquered. Before houses, winter remained powerful. The record reminds us of that power by what it preserves and by what it has lost. We are left with ash, stone, bone, sheltered floors, scattered clues, and the known vulnerability of the human body. From those pieces, a careful picture emerges. Ancient humans survived winter nights not by one miracle, but by combining many partial protections into a temporary world where warmth could last just long enough. A house did not end the human struggle with winter, but it changed the boundary. Before houses, protection had to be remade each night from place, material, fire, closeness, and attention. Later, when more stable shelters became part of human life, the boundary between body and weather became stronger and more predictable. A wall could block wind without needing to be chosen again every evening. A roof could keep rain or snow from falling directly on sleeping bodies. A floor could separate people from damp or cold ground. A doorway could mark a clearer difference between the space where the weather moved freely and the space where human warmth could gather. This was a profound change, because winter had always been powerful not only through cold, but through uncertainty. Before a house, the resting place could change with wind, dampness, fuel, darkness, and the condition of the group. With a more durable shelter, some of that uncertainty could be reduced. The body still needed food, fire, clothing, bedding, and care, but it no longer faced the whole night with the same openness. The cold was still present, but it was pushed farther away from the skin. This does not mean that the first houses were like modern homes. Early built shelters could be rough, smoky, drafty, temporary, seasonal, or made from perishable materials such as wood, hides, brush, reeds, earth, bone, or stone, depending on environment and time. Many would have offered only partial protection. Some may have been rebuilt often. Some may have belonged to mobile ways of life rather than fixed villages. The history of shelter was not a sudden leap from open ground to comfort. It was a slow thickening of the boundary that humans had already been trying to make for a very long time. A rock face had blocked one side of wind. A hide had covered one body. Dry grass had separated a sleeper from the ground. A fire had made a warmer centre. A group had formed a living shelter through closeness. A house gathered these older ideas into a more stable form. It made the temporary boundary more durable. In the deep story of human origins, this matters because it shows that houses did not appear as a completely new desire. They answered an ancient need already written into the body. The body needed a place where heat lasted longer, where children could sleep with less exposure, where tools and materials could be kept drier, where fire could be managed more safely, where rest could happen with fewer interruptions, and where memory could attach itself to one location. A house gave that need a shape. It turned repeated acts of protection into a place that could wait for people. This waiting quality is easy to overlook. Before houses, safety was often something people had to assemble again and again. After houses, some part of safety could remain when the body left, and return when the body came back. That changed winter psychologically as well as physically. The night no longer had to be read from the beginning every time. A known shelter could hold stored materials, familiar sleeping places, traces of earlier fires, and a sense that the group had marked one space against the weather. Yet the old problem did not vanish. A house without heat could still become cold, a leaking roof could still make bedding damp, smoke could still harm the eyes and lungs, food still had to be found or stored. Children still needed care, older people still needed protection. The body still remained warm-blooded, vulnerable, and dependent on energy. So the house should not be imagined as the end of winter's power. It was a new layer in the same ancient answer. It made the human boundary stronger, but it did not remove the body from nature. Winter still pressed against the walls. It still tested fuel, food, repair, and the strength of the group. The difference was that humans had begun to make the outside stay outside a little more reliably, and that small reliability changed the night. Even after houses became normal, the human body did not become a house-born body. It remained an older body living inside newer walls. This is why cold can still feel strangely personal to us. A draft across the floor, a cold room before dawn, the touch of bare feet on a winter surface, the sudden chill when a blanket slips away. These small experiences can make the body react before the mind has time to explain them. Shoulders lift, fingers draw inward, the spine tightens, the body seeks a warmer center. It does not need to know ancient history to respond. Its reactions come from older biological rules. Heat must be guarded. The center must stay warm. Sleep is safer when exposure is reduced. In that sense, modern comfort covers an ancient body rather than replacing it. The house changes the environment, but the body underneath still belongs to a long line of humans who had to take cold seriously. This does not mean we carry exact memories of ancient winter nights in a literal way. The body does not remember a single prehistoric camp or a single vanished fire, but it does carry systems shaped by long exposure to risk. The need to maintain internal warmth, the urge to curl inward, the discomfort of cold hands and feet, the desire for covering, the relief of shared warmth, and the deep association between warmth and safety. These responses are not stories, they are functions. They are part of how a warm-blooded human remains alive. Before houses, those functions were tested directly by the night. Inside houses, they are often hidden beneath comfort, yet they can still be felt when comfort weakens. The beginning of human life has not disappeared from the body simply because the room is modern. A person sleeping under a roof may still wake when cold reaches the skin. A child may still seek closeness when the night feels cold or uncertain. An older person may still feel cold more deeply when the body has less reserve. Hunger may still make cold harder. Fatigue may still make the body less able to respond. These are not signs that we are poorly made. They are signs that the human body was never designed to ignore the environment completely. It was designed to respond, to conserve, to seek help, and to use the world around it. A house allows us to forget much of this, but forgetting is not the same as being free from it. Winter still speaks to the body in a language older than architecture. It speaks through skin, breath, muscle, sleep, and the quiet wish to be enclosed. This is why the history of winter nights before houses matters even now. It reminds us that comfort is not a simple possession. It is a layer added over vulnerability. Walls, blankets, heating, mattresses, dry floors, and safe rooms are continuations of ancient solutions, not complete departures from them. A blanket does on a small scale what a hide, dry grass, or shared warmth once did. A floor does on a stable scale what a prepared sleeping surface once attempted. A room does on a larger scale what a rock shelter, a windbreak, or a gathered group once tried to create for a single night. The modern house is different in strength and form, but it answers the same old question. How can a warm body rest while the world outside grows cold? The answer today feels automatic because so much work has been built into the objects around us. But the body still knows the older truth. Warmth must be held, dryness matters, the ground matters, others matter, the night matters, and somewhere beneath the quiet of a heated room, the ancient body remains alert to the possibility that the boundary could fail. The story of winter before houses does not end with a single invention, because no single invention carried human beings through the cold. It was never only fire, never only caves, never only animal skins, never only closeness, never only courage. It was the way these things could be brought together imperfectly, night after night, around a body that could not afford to lose too much warmth. Ancient humans survived because they learned to reduce exposure in many small ways. They chose places where wind had less power. They used the land as partial shelter. They guarded warmth when warmth was available. They placed material between skin and cold ground. They stayed near one another. They protected children, older people, and bodies with less strength. They remembered what had worked before. They learned that winter did not need to strike quickly to become dangerous. It only needed time. This is the quiet lesson behind the whole question. Human survival was not built from comfort. It was built from attention. Long before walls made the world seem divided into indoors and outdoors, people were already trying to create a smaller version of indoors wherever they stopped. A dry layer beneath a body was a kind of floor before floors. A rock face was a kind of wall before walls. A covering close to the skin was a kind of roof before roofs. A group gathered near warmth was a kind of room before rooms. These things were fragile, temporary, and incomplete, but they carried the same purpose that houses would later make stronger: to slow the loss of heat, to protect sleep, to hold the vulnerable near the center, and to let morning arrive with life still intact. This is why the house should not make us forget what came before it. A house is not the opposite of ancient survival. It is one of its descendants. It gathers older human answers into a more durable shape. The wall continues the work of the windbreak. The floor continues the work of dry bedding. The blanket continues the work of hide, fur, leaves, grass, and shared warmth. The room continues the work of the group gathered against the dark. Modern comfort can make these older layers invisible, but it cannot erase the body that still needs them. We still sleep better when warm. We still curl inward when cold reaches us. We still feel relief when the ground beneath us is dry, when the air is still, when the night is held outside a little more firmly. Beneath the modern room, the old body remains. It is not a primitive body trapped in the past. It is a living body shaped by a long history of exposure and care. The educational value of this history is simple but deep. It reminds us that survival was never only domination over nature. It was relationship. Humans did not become human by standing apart from the world immediately. They became human by learning where the world was dangerous, where it was slightly kinder, and how to help one another pass through the difference. Winter nights before houses teach us that knowledge can be humble. A place chosen well can matter. A dry surface can matter. A person watched over can matter. A child kept warm can carry a whole future. A memory from one hard season can protect bodies in the next. In that sense, the earliest shelter was not just a physical thing. It was a way of paying attention to vulnerability. It was a way of saying, before there was a door to close, that the body must not be left alone with the night. And perhaps that is why a warm room still feels so quietly powerful. It is not only comfort. It is the latest form of an ancient answer, built over thousands of repeated evenings when people faced the cold and learned, slowly, how to keep one another near morning. If the body still remembers the danger, and the house still carries the shape of those older protections, then how much of our comfort today is really modern, and how much of it is an ancient winter night still being answered?